We're going to be looking at problems where we're finding standard deviation, and you see that I have my graphing calculator, so I want to also show you how to do this process on the graphing calculator. For our first problem, we see that we have the grade level reading scores from a random sample of 12 students. Some key words there are the random sample. So we want to use the formula for sample standard deviation. And we also see that it's individual scores. There's no grouping there. There's no interval there. So first thing we want to do is look up our formula to use. And so I'm getting S for the sample standard deviation, which always has the n-1. And I'm using the formula for ungrouped data. Now, working through this formula is quite a lot of work because it's a complicated formula. I'm going to start inside my parentheses, and I see inside there the xi would be each piece of data, the x bar would be the mean. So I'm just going to list out the steps to find standard deviation, and there are 6 of them. First thing I'd have to calculate is this mean, and then I go through each piece of data. So I'll take 9 and subtract the mean. Then I'll take 11 and subtract the mean, and you see that is step 2. I'm doing that piece in the parentheses. I'm subtracting the mean from each data value. This is where it gets to be a lot of work. I square all those answers. So each individual answer, 12 of them, all squared. Then I'm ready for the summation. So in step 4, I take all the squared answers, which are now all positive because squaring would make them all positive, and add them up. Divide that answer by n-1, which is 1 less than the total number of values. So here that would be 11. And then I take the square root. So what we're going to look at is doing this entire process on your calculator, making your calculator do most of the math for you instead of making a whole chart and going through all these steps by hand. So on our calculator, we have a feature called Stat, and you can see my cursor pointing at the Stat button. So I click on that. And then you see up here, Edit is highlighted and Edit is here, so I hit Enter. And you see that it brings up these lists. This is where I'm going to put my data. So the first thing I want to do is clear out the data I have from my last problem. So I'm going to use my arrow key, arrow up so that the list title is highlighted, and hit Clear and Enter. And that process will just clear out the whole list, everything that was in there, so that you have a fresh start. Now I'm going to go through and type all of my data. So I have to type enter after each piece. So 9, enter, 11, enter, 11, enter, 15, enter. And this can feel like a lot of work typing data, but when you think about how much time you're saving, it's amazing because you would have had to type in all these numbers to find the mean. And then you would have had to type in all these numbers again to subtract the mean from each one. So really just typing them once into the list, not so bad considering if we were going to go through the formula step by step without having our calculator do it. Now I'm typing my last one, and I do see here it says list 1, piece of data is number 12. And so that's just a nice place to check that I've gotten them all in. It now has gone to piece of data number 13, and I don't have that, so I am done. In order to calculate the standard deviation, I push my Stat button again because I'm doing statistics. And this time I want to go over to the Calculate menu because I want it to calculate things for me. So arrow over. Whole list of options. I am working with just one variable. So this first option is the one I want. I just press Enter. And I see this come up, and I want it to actually do the work, so I press Enter one more time. It's so fabulous. I just love it. Right here is the mean, so I didn't have to calculate that. It gives it to me, and I can round however my math lab or my homework assignment tells me. And then I look down through here. We were calculating S. You can see that from our formula. So SX 2.27, and again, gives us all kinds of decimals, so we can round however we wanted. Have this nice double check here that N, my number of data pieces, was 12, so I know that I entered everything in there. And so calculator did all the work. I didn't have to memorize the formula. I didn't have to do all of these steps. I just love it. It's so convenient. So make use of your calculator as you're doing your My Math Lab assignment, as you're doing your homework assignment. Standard deviation is just crazy to do by hand. So use your technology. All right, we're going to go to a second example. So for this one again, we're asked to find the standard deviation. and we have a random sample of 100 students from a university's graduating class, and we see that their GPAs are in intervals. So we're looking in our textbook and we find standard deviation. It is a sample, so I'm using this S formula. And I have the formula for group data, which we see this extra piece here. It has the frequency. So in order to do this problem, again, I would want to start in here. In group data, the xi is standing for the midpoint of each interval. So I look or recall that I'm going to have to find my midpoint, and then I'm going to have to find my mean to be able to do this part in parentheses, because parentheses, you recall, is what you have to do first. So my midpoint formula is to take the low number of the interval plus the high number and divide that by 2, and that will give me the xi, the midpoints. And then if I would go to doing the grouped mean, I need those midpoints times the frequency in order to find the grouped mean. So I'm going to go over here to my calculator, clear what we've got in there. Alright, we want to do midpoint first of this first interval, so I would type in 1.95 plus 2.15, get that sum, and divide it by 2, and there I have my first midpoint. Now, I'm going to do the second one. Typically there's a pattern with the midpoints, and so if I can pick up the pattern, I don't have to type these all into my calculator. So next interval is 2.15 plus 2.35. Get the sum, divide it by 2, 2.25. So I see the pattern right away. They're going up by 0.2 each time. And so I'm going to type all of my midpoints right in here so that I have them to work with. Now I can't show my calculator while I'm typing, so my calculator's moved away. So we found 2.05, 2.25. We noticed they were going up by 0.2, 2.45, 2.65. And when I look at the interval, you see that these are right in the middle. Keep going down, 3.25. 3.45, 3.65, and 3.85. So now I have all of my xi data, which I need to find the mean, or I need to find the standard deviation. From this point, once we have the midpoint, we could use this formula to find the grouped mean. Then we would subtract the mean from each midpoint, working in the parentheses. Similar to before, we would square each answer. Then we would take that entire list and multiply it by the frequency. And then we could add up all those answers, divide by the n minus 1, take the square root. So again, crazy amount of work. We are going to instead go to our calculator and have our calculator do the work. So like before, we're going to hit the stat button. We're going to hit enter for edit. I want to clear out my data from the previous problem, so clear and hit enter. Now in column 1 is where I want to put this midpoint data. So it is going to take me a moment. I encourage you to follow along on your calculator to type each midpoint. And again, it's so much better than having to do this by the formula. So typing this in will take you a few minutes, but we're only typing them once. We're not having to find the mean and then subtract the mean and all of those steps to find this by the formula. Our calculator is going to do most of that work for us. So I have 10 in, I'm at data piece 11, which is exactly where I want to be. Now, in this formula, those midpoints, yes, they get subtracted by the mean and all of that, but they get multiplied by the frequencies. So I do need to supply the frequencies into my calculator. So I'm going to use my over arrow to get to list 2, and I'm going to go right down through and type in the frequencies. Now the frequencies have to correspond, so you do have to keep them in order. My midpoint of 2.05 had a frequency of 21. And so I just go down through typing all of my frequencies in list 2. And again, I see at the bottom of my list everything has corresponded. If something's off, you can always go up to the top, clear the list, and try retyping. So once I have the midpoints and the frequencies in my calculator, I choose my stat menu. I want it to calculate something for me, so I go over to calculate. I am still dealing with one variable, statistics, because my variable is just this GPA. I only really collected one piece of information. So I hit enter for that. Now this is the part that's different. I need my calculator to use to list. So I type, and I'm going to type second and the number 1 so that my calculator registers list 1. And that's where I stored my midpoints. And then I type the comma, which is right above the 7. And then I'll type list 2, second, and the number 2 gives me list 2. And so I want my calculator to use both lists because one has the midpoints, one has the frequency. And at that point I type enter. And look at that. So here is the mean of all of that, and it did this whole grouped mean formula for me. And I can round as needed. And then down here the SX, because we were doing sample standard deviation, and again it has it to more decimal points than I'll ever need. I can double check here. My N is 100 pieces of data, which is exactly what I had 100 students polled, so I know that it used both lists, all the information, and I have my answer without having to do all 8 steps of going through that formula. So please make use of your technology when you're doing these problems, especially in my math lab. As there's a handful of problems, use the technology so that they don't take you all that long.